And now I'm going to share screen. Okay, and now I can plug in for Rudy. And here we'll see Jim Teisel's contribution this week, which if you don't like my tangent off into the Jesuits, you have to blame Jim. It doesn't take much to get me off on a tangent.
That's not really fair, John.
One.
Yeah, just click right there.
Don't blame me. That's not fair.
No, I'm tongue in cheek, Jim.
I love that. I love blaming James Teisel. This is fascinating. I want more James Teisel interferences.
Okay. See, the getting me off my topic is a welcome thing, Jim. So it's a positive. So this map got me thinking, yeah, well, wait a minute, where is this from? Well, it's after Kentucky became a state, but it's before the Louisiana Purchase. So who knows? Somewhere between around 1800s. That'll be fair enough for our purposes. And this map is just look at it. It's not the map in our mind of early America. And here is Santa Fe. And I will say that Santa Fe and St. Augustine and Jamestown are not that far apart, maybe 10 years. You can quibble about the first city established. For sure, Santa Fe makes the claim it's the first capital city in North America. So, and here we're in on the ground floor. We've been following the Spanish ever since they came in, and in particular, for our purposes, conquered Tenochtitlan. So that is the year I'm interested in, and I think what happened between this year, 1543, when Cabrillo, that's as far as we got, when he died of infected leg wound, which we all are identifying with now with Homer, and this is a summary of his trip. He was the first one to get above Baja, California. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about Baja, but he ventured forth, but that was pretty much it for a while. And what happened between this 250 years between Cabrillo and around 1790? Spain accumulated so much wealth. The Habsburgs, and very early on with Carol and Jose, we used the Habsburg as a through line for European history, and that you can cover 3 centuries of European history just by focusing on the Habsburgs. They had so much wealth intermarried all over Europe, but they had plenty of money, especially after they mined Potosi and let me get the country right, Peru, so they could afford to put missions in as far as north as they could get. But the missions didn't stop in Baja for a couple of centuries. So that's interesting. And it's finally in around 1580, 1590 that they can send missionaries up to California, the current state of California. But they were a different kind of missionaries that settled Baja. It was the Jesuits that settled Baja. And they were finally thrown out and replaced by the Franciscans. And the Franciscans got a little bit of practice in Baja, but as we know, Junipero Serra took it all the way, and as every California school kid knows. But every Baja school kid knows about Kino. Kino, he set up a lot of missions in Baja. He started off on the mainland first, and then crossed over to Baja. But I want to contrast Kino and Junipero Serra. It's quite a contrast. First of all, Kino's a Jesuit, and that's my point of departure today. And as a Jesuit, he was an internationalist and Enlightenment guy who was interested in geography and astronomy, German born, and in 1665, after he recovered from an illness, and we'll see this theme, when people recover from illnesses, they tend to do something religious. He became a Jesuit, and as a Renaissance man, came to Mexico. And Serra, on the other hand, identified very much as Spanish, and not an internationalist, and he was a Franciscan. So this is interesting. It's Kino that the state of Arizona picks to put up in its slot in the Emancipation Hall in the U.S. Capitol. So why is that? How could an American state pick up a Jesuit fellow from Baja? And some of this is going to get us into water, California water. That's my hook. That's my very loose connection. And I'm going to run with it. So first of all, what the heck is the Emancipation Hall? So it was just put up in 2008. I don't think we knew about it when we were there. And it's under the Capitol. We've become very familiar with the architecture of the Capitol since January 6th. But it's under the Capitol, so the entrance is subterranean. And you go in, and what do you see? You see a plaster of the statue that's on top of the Capitol. We're quite familiar with that, but what is it? And it's the Statue of Freedom, and here's the plaster mold that you can examine. And when did that go up? 1863, during the Civil War. During the Civil War, Lincoln was building the Capitol. Quite amazing. And that means that a lot of the labor building the Capitol was in fact African Americans, some free, some slave. And in the section downstairs, if you go to New York, or I'm sorry, Washington, which I intend to do with my grandkids, inshallah, there's always an exhibition hall that focuses on present day history of Washington, starting in 1945. So there, add that to your list. So why Kino? How does water in California get Kino into the statue in Washington, D.C.? Well, not only is he in Washington, D.C., he's at the state capital of Arizona. And here he is on a horse. And this gets us back to our good friend, the Colorado, which is the Colorado River, which has come up in so many contexts over the last few weeks. The Native Americans that Kino found there were already agricultural. It was more of a challenge on Baja, where they were more hunter-gatherers and not as agricultural. But Kino and Sonoran on the mainland introduced European seeds, taught them cattle husbandry, and was able to grow a herd of 20 that he started with to 70,000. And when we get to the history of Contra Costa County, that's pretty much the history of Contra Costa County. We started off as a big Spanish rancho, eventually became a Mexican rancho, and then the Americans came. And we'll get to that history. So here's the map. This is the upper Gulf. Either the Sea of Cortez or the Gulf of California. Take your pick. So many different names. There's other little gulfs here. There's the Gulf of Santa Clara. And this is where the Colorado comes down. Now, unfortunately, it's been reduced to a dotted line, and we know why that is. I want to point out just from a personal history for Aiko. Aiko and I camped out a couple of days at Puerto Penasco. And this is when we were on the Indian reservation, the Navajo reservation. And I'm allowed to say Indian reservation. Anybody want to challenge me on that? I'm prepared. Puerto Penasco is a straight shot down from Arizona. We were in northern Arizona. And we had a memorable vacation with a couple of other people living with us on the medical staff of the hospital where I was, Puerto Penasco. Note Yuma. So you may remember when we were doing Cortez, that he sent up, and this was the last person that he sent up during his power run in Mexico. He sent up an explorer named Alvarado, whose main mission was to resupply Coronado, who was going to be coming by to pick up supplies that they shipped up. Never connected, but Alvarado hung out here and got up to Yuma. And the speculation was if he stepped off on the west side of the Colorado, he was the first Spaniard to be in the current state of California, which is right across from Yuma, and not Cabrillo. But that's just for a fun nerd talk. Onwards. So further upstream, just for context, here's the Salton Sea. Jim just sent me some new stuff on the ancient history of Salton Sea, which you'll see next week. and here's Joshua Tree. A lot of people have been there. And here's this little dotted line that comes up. And you get all the way up here to Havasu and Lake Havasu. And we've heard of that. So here's a question. A gold star who can tell me what the connection is between Havasu and London. Who and Harold just checked in, so I'll just repeat the question. What is the connection between Havasu, Lake Havasu, and London?
Well, it's
London
the bridge.
Bridge.
Oh, very good. We got two gold stars. Excellent. Very good. So Lake Havasu is a result of damming from 1938, Parker Dam. And it was for, more aqueducts. We've talked about the aqueducts, and that's what created Salton Sea. It was named Mojave, which was the local native name for blue. And early on, beaver trappers, and then there was mining along both sides of the river by Spaniards around Lake Havasu before the dam was built. And what did that create? That created a safe eating advisory for fish caught in Lake Havasu for mercury poisoning. And we know that that's a problem in the Bay Area because we're downstream from a placer mining, which we'll get to when we get to the gold rush. But in some of these amazing connections that you just keep bumping into in history, it was stocked, Lake Havasu was stocked with white sturgeon from our local San Pablo Bay, and go figure. So two connections, one to London and one to San Pablo Bay. Blah, blah, blah. We'll skip over that. Sturgeon, 20 feet long, can live to be 100 years old. And of course, the Havasu Tourist Board wants you to try to catch a glimpse of a sturgeon, whether they're there or not. The Loch Ness monster people have done the same thing. So here's London Bridge, now at Lake Havasu. And we have a lot of people who've been to London, and Rudy and his wife Debbie are like us, Anglophiles. And so if you want to go to the original London Bridge, Rudy, you go to Lake Havasu. It's not a special kind of bridge. It's not a beautiful bridge. It's just a historic bridge. And here, yeah.
I don't know if it's true, but I have heard that they thought they were buying Tower Bridge, not London Bridge.
Which is more picturesque.
Absolutely.
That's funny. That's hilarious. So here's the view from London Bridge, and the entrepreneur that purchased it, he set up these tourist communities to make money. So the Lake Havasu is half in Arizona and half on California. The California part is in San Bernardino County. All right, so back to the expelled Jesuits. I contrasted Kino de Serra and the Jesuits to the Franciscans, and the internationalists to the more parochial Serra, Spanish. And a tolerance, a Jesuit tolerance, especially for native folkways and to a more rigid, no, the natives have got to be by the book Christians. So that's going to make a difference. Again, back to this international man from Tyrol, now in southern Austria, and with a big section in northern Italy, interestingly enough. And his stepping on the shore of northern Mexico, Sonora, but eventually getting over to Baja. And as he got over to Baja, the Jesuits were in big political problems, not with their hosts abroad, but with the monarchs of Europe, who were reformists and were wanting to suppress the independence of the Jesuits and what they were doing. But before then, the Jesuits got all around the place, particularly where the Portuguese settlers but even to Ming China, and they were in the Ming court. They were predicting solar eclipses, and that really impressed the Chinese. They were using the scientific information of the Enlightenment and impressing the Ming. And then they got to Japan, and they had initial success. But here's the thing with Japan. We're talking about autocracy and democracy versus autocracy. But what happens when autocracy wins? Well, Japan, you can argue, had 250 years of fascism. I mean, just rigid power at the top, enforced famously by samurai. But here's the thing: the arts flourished. A lot of the things that we appreciate about Japan began during that period of peace enforced by the Tokugawa. And so when it looked like the Jesuits were having some success, the Tokugawa, and this was one of the first things they did after they took power, they crucified a couple of dozens in the harbor at Nagasaki in 26. This is a depiction of that crucifixion at Nagasaki. And it was captured, this period and the suppression of the Jesuits was captured brilliantly by Scorsese. It's not an easy movie to watch. There's a lot of sadomasochism, but it's got Adam Driver, for instance, and Liam Neeson, and The Silence. So Kino, though, was doing much better in Baja, and the Dominicans were also there. I left out discussing them, but they weren't as prominent as the Jesuits and Franciscans in putting up missions. Now, what was it that drove the Spanish north? Well, um, I say Britain. More appropriately, it would be England. Gold star for anybody that can tell me what English threat the Spain of at the time of at the time of the early Jesuits. What threat? Why did they want to have a presence in California?
The guy was going up to the boatman. What's his name? That went up to the looking for the. No, he went. He came.
He was looking for the Northwest Passage. Yeah. So. But the iteration that appeared shortly after Cabrillo was Sir Francis Drake, and we've all been to Drake's Bay, and they were right to be worried. So when he got to Drake's Bay, and I think around 1570, they started. Wait a minute, maybe we should read what Cabrillo had to say, and carried on. And they did briefly, and I'll talk about that eventually. But it was short-lived, and then they didn't start worrying about the North again until the time of first Kino, but especially during the time of the Franciscans and Father Serra, when the Russians were beginning to come down. Their expansion was to the east. So go east, young man, go east. And they settled in Alaska. And then Alaska was not a good place to grow fruits and vegetables. So, and it was a little bit far to get produce up from the Volga and the Dnieper from Ukraine. That was their breadbasket. So they looked south to California, and of course we have Fort Ross, and that's a living example of their interest, and that's also what spurred the Spanish to reconsider moving north with their missions. Yes, Harold.
Well, the Russians were primarily entrepreneurs in those days, and they were fur trappers. And the Tsar got annoyed because he wanted to control everything. So he basically pulled them back. He didn't want people settling there permanently. He was fine with them trapping furs, but not to be settlers.
Yeah, good. A good point. We went to an exhibition on Fort Ross that went through a lot of this stuff. I think by the time of Fort Ross being built, there was interest in minerals as well. But you're absolutely right. It was fur. And we can see it in European development of our Pacific Northwest. It was fur trapping that bought out a lot of mountain men in particular, but also Astor. Astor set up a port and built Fort Astoria up in where Teisel was grown up, in that direction, and he developed a trade with China. It was the Chinese that were really super interested in furs, and so that trade and Astor became, as we know, very wealthy. He saw the light and got out at the right time and went back and got into real estate and built things like, I don't know, the Waldorf Astoria. So yeah, fur trading was for Russians. That was a gold mine, literally. They got these furs and they traded them down down south through the Ukraine, probably, and on to Constantinople, because fur was quite valued, not just by the Chinese, but by everybody, and especially the northern pelts, northern fur, as we can understand from Darwin, was much thicker, more follicles per square millimeter. So it was highly valued, fur from the north. Okay, thanks for that, Harold. Okay, so the Spanish missions in Baja, I've been through this, and the other thing that they introduced, and we've got a medical contingent here, smallpox and measles. But smallpox and measles were particularly a danger to urban communities, not so much to hunter-gatherers. They could come through, but they'd burn out pretty quickly. But when hunter-gatherers did gather into new small villages and communities where they never lived, the syphilis that was endemic became more epidemic, with increased sexual contacts. And that it was more immediately affecting the reproduction than it is now. Now it's settled and was more chronic. So the major tribes at Baja are listed here. The only one that we've encountered and will encounter again are the Kumeyaay. These were, you'll remember, the natives that were living in San Diego when Cabrillo landed. But look at all the missions. We think of our missions, but look at all the missions that the mostly Jesuits established from the time Kino arrived to the time they're closed down, probably about 100 years. And there's even one in Cabo San Lucas.
So those are missions of the Jesuits, not the Franciscans.
But yeah, mostly Jesuits, but then there was an overlap. So I'm not going to be dogmatic about it, but mostly Jesuits, but there was certainly an overlap as the monarchy, Spanish monarchy, was considering its next move. And as there are a lot of pictures. I picked the one that I thought was the prettiest, of a mission in Baja. The Jesuit downfall. If you haven't seen the movie The Mission, and you're interested in this, it documents it very clearly, and with beautiful, breathtaking photography. Something like Iguazu Falls nearby. Anyway, I just watched it recently and loved it. And it's got, in addition to De Niro, it's got Jeremy Irons. Yeah.
15 minutes, because you want to discuss the Monkey King.
I wanted to what?
Discuss the Monkey King, so you've got 15 minutes.
Well, we'll let the Monkey King come as it might. All right. So the beef that the Habsburgs had with the Jesuits, they thought they were too socialist. You'll see this in the movie, The Mission, and they thought that the Jesuits were controlling the natives too closely. That, in fact, was not the case. This example that's in the mission, the history of that is that they were independent and quite happy to have the Jesuits there working with them. And but that didn't stop the Jesuits from being expelled, first by the Portuguese, then by the French, and finally by Spain. And then the Pope joined in and suppressed the whole order. But guess what? Francis is a Jesuit, so the Jesuits were restored. And Francis is a Jesuit. And he's, of course, a remarkable person. In addition to being a Jesuit, he's the first Pope from America, first from the Southern Hemisphere, and the first Pope born and raised outside of Europe. So quite remarkable. Things change. But I mentioned earlier that the Jesuits were really good about meshing the principles of Christianity and blending it with the traditions of saints with the local pantheons. Today, Aiko and I have experienced a interesting challenge to Catholicism in general, and that's Pentecostalism. We were visiting the family where our son lived when he did a volunteer project in Costa Rica, building schools. And one afternoon, we were attending the local Catholic church for a milestone for one of their sons. It is amazing. This is a very wet and muddy community, but everybody was in white, just beautiful white for this ceremony. But the architecture in Costa Rica, they're certainly not soundproof. And it's often with a space between the rafters of the roof and the wall, so you can hear outside noise. And when the Catholics started singing their hymns, the Pentecostals started singing theirs from a distance. It was quite a cacophony. One shout out, Joanne Martins, who aspires to join us quite soon now that she's in retirement, follows us, and she sent this along. I don't know if any of you saw it. Jim, I think it was California Today, your son-in-law. They put up a whole list of books that explain California, not just history, but books in general. And if you want to go, there's the website. All right, so that's the end of my California thing, and we'll see if we can get to the Monkey King. Any questions, comments about our quick look ahead to where we're going with California history once we stop being distracted by the interesting world we're living in? Okay, onward and forward. I also, one topic I put up was this concept of reaching across the aisle and consensus and compromise. And it was really piqued by first this article and then a conjecture that the polarized debate over wokeism is over. And I thought, wow, I hope that's true. But this was a really good example of two people, columnists for the Washington Post, maybe over coffee, saying, well, look, there are some things that we can agree about abortion. So let's look at abortion neutral policies that we could agree on. And we better do something pretty quick, because pregnancy is getting more and more dangerous for women. And of course, the problem with getting access to full range of gynecological and obstetrical care with Roe being disappeared, it might get worse. And some of this up curve may be a function of that. A lot of it is probably COVID. But what can we agree on from the moment of conception to college? What are some abortion neutral policies? Well, one is make pregnancy less dangerous. Who's going to be against that? And we see, for those of us in the medical racket, the rise of preeclampsia and postpartum depression, and I think even diabetes. So I won't dwell on it, but they proposals that have already come across the aisle. One from Grassley and from Iowa and Hansen. I hope I just heard a click. Are you all still there?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we're here.
I think the click was Ico's. So we have vowed, if there's any technical problems here in studio, that we just keep plowing on, and we're not stopping. So how maternal care is taught in medical schools, access to duelas, which is the Spanish term for lay counseling, not exactly lay counseling, but something similar, telehealth, making glucose monitors available. And they could also agree on helping babies become more affordable, so that women don't feel so desperate financially that they look for abortion. So supplemental nutrition for women and babies. Even keep the baby, but give it up for adoption. And here's the tax credit that will give for that. And then having a baby, all these extra associated costs with having babies, make these expenses tax deductible. And then after school care, once you have a baby, you want to keep your job, but you don't know how am I going to who's going to look after my baby while I work. That's something that we can focus on like a laser. So I asked you if you had any examples of other reaching across the aisle that you've witnessed, and I'll pause to see if anybody else has them. Okay, well, I've got more. So this is the New York Times columnist, and they have a podcast called It's a Matter of Opinion. And they've recently tackled what is going on with the curriculum of high schools. And I think the way to phrase this is trying to find the right balance between pride of our in our national history and the need to make this nation more perfect, right? More perfect union. So, Obama kept talking about that, pride and more perfect union. And Hamilton, that take on the history of America that put in the problem of Jefferson owning slaves, and the way he did it with humor, but with a lot of also sarcasm and challenge to some of our traditional founding fathers. I think there are ways that we can teach our kids to be proud and seeking a more perfect union. And then they went on to talk about, hey, listen, we think there's a lot of evidence that there's a woke burnout, and politics is catching up slowly but surely. A lot of this stuff did not come up in the Republican debate, including critical race theory, which we're all tired of hearing about. But we'll always have to hear about complaints of teachers' unions and devolving more power to the state. So that's still there, but some of the other really more minor but divisive stuff might be fading. Another example, in addition to what we saw with the Washington Post and the New York Times, is in broadcasting left, right, and center. KCRW in LA, they've been putting this up for a long time, and I surely enjoy listening to it. And the Dispatch, I've discovered, is a very reasonable and culture-rich conservative take on the political process. That you would call them conservative centrists. I don't know if they consider themselves that, but I quite like their people. They're all reasonable. The whole thing was really led by Jonah Goldberg, who appears a lot on NPR and CNN as their token conservative quite often. But then they've got some real hard-nosed conservatives as well. But they have this, I think, a bright star, a woman, Sarah Easger, and she is bright enough to appear on left, right, and center as the right. I've been following Chris Stirewalt since the beginning of Trump. He is on Fox News, but he's more in the nature of a political commentator and not a opinion guy. And because of his role at Fox News, he was also in charge on election night of predicting outcomes by states, and he had integrity. And when their algorithms saw that Arizona was going to go for Biden, Fox News called it, and that was the Democrats' first win of the night. I was about ready to go to bed and shoot myself in the next morning, but I got up in the middle of the night and just checked what Fox News was projecting, and they projected Arizona. So I put away my gun, and guess what happened to Chris Stirewalt? Trump called the Fox News people, Rupert Murdoch, and demanded that they fire Stirewalt, and they did. But this is where he landed. He landed here, and I still enjoy his commentary. And then
what channel is that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Dispatch is a more a website, and they have podcasts, and you can hear podcasts of these guys, which I think are very good, in particular, when Jonah Goldberg interviews Chris Starwalt, they really are quite entertaining. Anyway, that Dispatch. These are the other things you get if you sign in with them, and I have, and I've enjoyed it.
A minute, John. What's Chris Hayes doing on this list? He's an MSNBC personality.
Who?
Chris Hayes.
Yeah, Chris Hayes is the joint founder. Maybe it's not Chris Hayes. Maybe I know who you mean. Maybe I had a brain fart. It's Chris something. Steve. Okay. I'm sorry. It's Steve Hayes. My bad. Okay. My bad. It's Steve Hayes. Thanks for catching that, Homer. I'll correct that immediately. It takes a village, folks. So I could stop here.
Three.
It's 3. I got another 5 minutes if there's no questions. Let me see if I can at least squeeze this in. This is in the same vein. I'm sorry, I don't think we're going to get the Monkey King, but I want to squeeze this in. This is the weekly column from The Economist called Lexington, and it's about RFK and what the Democrats could do to get back the blue collar that we lost to the Republicans and are killing us. And the thing about this article that reached out and just grabbed me was RFK was in Indianapolis, my hometown, the night Martin Luther King was assassinated, right? And this was particularly what they say, and I'm going to share some of that. It's particularly poignant because I've just finished the book on the history of the Ku Klux Klan, the second version of them in the 1920s. The center of it was Indianapolis. And I just finished that book with my Berkeley book club and was feeling pretty bad about Indianapolis. But then this made me feel a lot better. So this is a statue in an Indianapolis park. And this never really happened, but this is poetic license. Kennedy reaching out across the aisle, if you will, across the racial divide to Martin Luther King. And he earned it because he gave a spontaneous speech in a park in Indianapolis the night King was murdered. So the city of Indianapolis put up this landmark for peace in the Martin Luther King park. And everybody notes that it was remarkable what happened that day, but what didn't happen, there was no rage or burning or looting in Indianapolis that night. And the Indianapolis, you could argue, in the 1920s, the KKK proved it was one of the most racist cities. I could give you many other examples. But here was Kennedy earlier in the day when King was assassinated. And the audiences were largely African-American, not exclusively, but because he could speak to everybody about disempowerment. And there's a current commentator, a very thoughtful guy, Michael Sandel, Harvard ethicist, actually. I think he wrote a ethics column for the Times for a while, and he's talked about democracy's discontent and talked about RFK. And then so King is assassinated, and obviously Kennedy cancels and drives out and gives this speech. And Indianapolis remained calm. So you get to thinking, God, what if Kennedy had continued in that vein and been a Democratic populist in '68, alternative to Nixon, and then you'd have somebody that a lot of us are like what George Bernard Shaw said. I dream of things that never were, and say, why not? These are the optimists among us. So he could quote Camus about empathy, and he could quote Aeschylus about making gentle the life of this world. So that's see, I just get right on the edge of China and the superhero, and I do have to stop. So I'll take questions, comments.
I have a question.
There's an interesting podcast, Glenn Lowry and I think it's John McWhorter.
Yeah.
They're conservatives, but they're not totally to the right. They make a lot of sense sometimes.
Yeah, I agree.
Interesting to tune in.
Yeah, I've listened to them. I think they're perfectly reasonable, and I've heard them interviewed on other more centrist podcasts as well. Thanks for that, Harold. I agree. Aiko.
Did I miss something as to why the Jesuits were pushed out by the Franciscans? Were the Franciscans, I mean, Spain was going up and up, and they wanted someone more nationalist. Is that what the deal was?
I think the answer is that it's not the Franciscans that pushed them out. It was the European monarchies thought that they were getting too big for their britches, and they were.
Jesuits were getting too big for the britches.
Yes, and so you'll remember in the movie The Mission. We'll put it on rewind, Aiko, and look at part of that. You see the conflict. In particular, Jeremy Irons, who plays the chief Jesuit, how he goes up against the local commandante, in the military, and how he goes up against the local viceroy. So yeah, I think that's the answer.
Thank you.
Welcome. Okay, so maybe that's it. We went out without a glitch. I appreciate you guys coming back this week after the terrible experience last week, and so tell your friends.
Thank you, John.
Bye.
Thanks, John. Yeah.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John.
I want a quick story about the Monkey King. How do I find the Monkey King?
Oh, it's not quick.
Okay, maybe we'll go offline and do a long one.
Yeah, Carol, for you, because you're one of our founders, I'll give you a quick tour, and then I'll do the slow one next week for for the others. Anybody that wants to stay and
Okay.
watch the Monkey King, it's quite
We have to go down and do the car.
it is quite
Do
interesting.
you want it? Should we like stop recording and then not everybody needs to?
Yeah, I'll stop recording, but you stay.
I'm staying. Thanks.
Okay,
Catch you later. Thanks, John.
you bet, Bruce. Okay, let's see. I've got to stop recording.